Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone on Zoom today and whenever you're watching this. We have people from all around the world who have signed up for this workshop, and this is our final session of the Guide for Astronomers Applying to Positions in Industry, or GAAP-II. We have today a whole bunch of people in Canada who have gone in many different directions, but who all started in astronomy and all started in like the last 6 years or so. Um, and so I hope that everyone on Zoom and watching after this is very grateful for all of the time they've put into being here today and answering all of our questions. With that, I will turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves, and then we'll get starting with our questions. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Hi, everybody. So I'm Ashley, and my background is in astrophysics. I completed my PhD at McMaster University, followed by postdoctoral fellowships at Line Observatory and the Waterloo Center for Astrophysics. I transitioned into industry late last year, and I'm currently working as a data scientist, focusing heavily on digital signal processing and nuclear magnetic resonance, so a little bit outside of astrophysics realm. And I switched specifically, really more for practical reasons. My family and I wanted to stay in Canada, and the job options are in astrophysics pretty limited. And so, yeah, so happy to talk to you all today.
I think I'm next. Yeah, my name is Spencer. Um, yeah, I finished my PhD in January of 2024, where I was focusing mainly on galactic archaeology, but also a lot of tools built using machine learning. I was basically a machine learning specialist in my PhD. Um, and then I took a break for about 5 months and got a job at Ocean Networks Canada as a machine learning specialist. So right up my alley. Um, and yeah, I made the switch because I was a little bit burnt out after my PhD. Um, and I wanted to try something new. I wanted to leave academia for a bit. I'm probably not coming back to academia at this point. But yeah, I just wanted something different. And the job description at Ocean Networks Canada, where I currently work, was essentially everything that I did in astrophysics. Like the transition over into industry was very seamless for me. Um, yeah, and I've been loving it. So happy to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike. So I did my PhD, I finished my PhD late, actually no, I guess early 2000, so 10, not 2000, 2020. Did the postdoc and a half where basically there was a little bit of time where I finished my first postdoc. I actually had to do caregiving. Took up a second postdoc briefly for financial stability and made transition about a year and a half ago. My research was on observation study of star formation, mostly looking at gas dynamics in molecular clouds. During PhD, I had a chance to release two Python packages. They're technically machine learning, but not neural net or anything fancy in that sense. Um, so in terms of career transition, I'm still in the job market. I did have an interview for a few data science jobs with large companies, including senior positions. And in terms of why I decided to switch, partially I kind of knew I want to do something that has higher impact and more immediate impact to society. So even mid grad school, I knew I probably won't stay in academia for too long per se. And so that's kind of one part of it. And I think resonating with probably a lot of speakers here and probably some different students, also just life stability, financial stability, and so forth. Yeah.
I think I'm next. Maybe sorry, I was looking at the alphabet. That's a little hard this time of the morning. Hi, everyone. I'm Max. I'm just finishing up my PhD in astrophysics at UVic, defending about 2 weeks. So I am trying to hope to apply the lessons that we've been talking about, the past couple of weeks in these panels here. And the reason why I'm planning to transition from academia out of industry has kind of been said by some of the other speakers. Just looking for some stability and in terms of like life location, a little bit of burnout, and also just trying my hand at something new. So happy to take all your questions today.
Yeah, I think I'm next. Uh, my name is Henry Ngo. I'm probably a bit of an imposter here since I did my undergrad at UBC and a master's at Queen's University, and then I finished my PhD at Caltech, but that was back in 2017. I'm definitely not a recent grad, but hopefully my some information is still going to be useful. I'm calling from the traditional territories of the Sinoimo people and the home of the Mid-Island Métis uh, Association. So that's Nanaimo in BC. And so yeah, my background was in planetary astronomy, doing a lot of like observational astronomy as well as N-body simulation in the past. I finished my PhD in 2017, and then I did a postdoc, a PASCA fellowship at MRC Pittsburgh from 2017 to end of 2019. In early 2020, I switched over to the provincial government. The main reason for my switches was because but even when I started my PhD, the goal was to be in BC in the end. Like that was a long-term goal. And as everyone knows here, if you have a geographic restriction and the number of jobs in Canada is the Venn diagram is very small. So even from the start of my PhD, the intention was that I wanted to build up my skills as much as possible so that I could find a data-ish job in BC, whether it's in academia or not. And the NRC was like if I could pick any job in astronomy, it would be at NRC because I really like the idea of supporting research and supporting scientific work rather than trying to be the PI of my own grant and lead my own scientific program. So that's one of the big reasons I switched because I felt like to really continue in astronomy outside of NRC, which hires one person every few years, 5 years maybe. You have to be able to be that kind of PI role, and I'm not really into that. And the other reason, also really important, was family stability. I have 3 kids, and I wanted to be in BC where that's my family is, where my partner's family is, and also the work-life balance. Like in my postdoc, someone told me, I don't think it's true, but I mean, there's that a lot of that pervasive thought that you can be good at 2 out of 3 things. You can be a good partner, a good parent, or a good scientist. And I don't want to pick. I want to do all 3. So I did not want to stay in astronomy. So yeah, and so I went to government. I worked for the office of the provincial health officer, and basically the third day of work, we start talking about the new coronavirus. So my job wasn't supposed to be that, but my first year I ended up just doing modeling for the coronavirus stuff for BC, and I ended up with able to use a lot of principles from N-body simulation to model how the virus transmits between people. So we were like the official reporting group for a while, but then was able to switch back to my actual job that I was hired for as a data scientist in kind of like population health surveillance. And then a few years ago, I switched over to the Ministry of Environment and Parks, and I am the director for data strategy there. So I don't do as much data science in my day-to-day anymore, but I supervise a lot of data science people. And in general, uh, uh, my my team now supports environmental monitoring. I'm just going to put a link for the government of BC, and specifically my team members look over the air, land, and water monitoring. So it's a lot of data that is very similar to astronomy and remote sensing type stuff.
I think Carter might be frozen.
I was
Megan, do you
just
want
going to
to
say,
go?
I think Carter looks frozen, so maybe I can go next. Hello, I'm Megan Tannock. I got my PhD at Western University back in 2021 in Brandorf atmospheres, variability, chemistry of the clouds, etc., that sort of thing. After a postdoc at Western as well, I left academia in late October 2022 And I've been at the same company since I left academia. I work for Cosmographic software, working on their universe simulator called Space Engine. So I'm in a very, very fortunate position where I am in industry, but I am still very much doing astronomy. I feel very grateful and very privileged to be in this position because I do love astronomy and I loved my research. But my story, much like everybody else here, is that I was craving stability. I wanted to be closer to family. Choosing a specific location you want to end up in kind of really limits you in academic astronomy. Unfortunately, you kind of have to go where the jobs are, and that academic, like sought after tenure track professor position, it's almost never going to be in the city that you want to end up in. So I decided to leave. I also, in 2020, like peak pandemic, a professor at UVic asked me to look deep inside myself and think about what I wanted in life, and whether that's a family or career or something or both or everything. And I looked deep inside myself and I decided I wanted a house, and that these, but like the salary of an academic career prior to that like elusive tenure track professor position was not going to get me there. So, you know, if you have material reasons for leaving astronomy, that's okay too. Not that it was easy to leave. I grieved. I was very sad to leave my academic astronomy career. But I'm very, very happy with where I ended up. And I can't imagine my life in academia, moving for postdocs and trying to find that stability and community that I have managed to find. Someone else mentioned the work-life balance. Like, I never got that when I was in academia, and I have that now and I love it. So, yeah.
Your go, Carter, now that you've returned.
Yeah, sorry about that. Naturally, my internet crashed the second it was my turn to go, as things are. So, hi, everybody. My name's Carter Ray. I actually defended my dissertation exactly 2 years ago to the day. So, this is always a fun day for me. I did my PhD at the University of Montreal in observational astrophysics and probably too much machine learning. Um, and I decided to switch to industry actually before I graduated. So while I was doing my PhD, my advisor was extremely kind and let me do a couple of different 6-month long part-time work at different companies here in Quebec, which was a great experience, made doing the PhD a little tougher, but oh well, I'm glad I did it. I also, my wife and I, when we moved here, we fell in love with Montreal, so we knew we wanted to stay here, and we started a family during my PhD. So for us, it was also that, you know, there's a good family reason to stay, and having kids is not the cheapest thing ever, especially nowadays. So having a job that actually paid was nice. Um, and so for the first couple months after my PhD, I worked for a company building ML tools, mainly with large language models. But then a job popped up at a new startup that was actually building an instrument. And so now I am the lead for the data reduction and data pipeline for a new telescope being built down in Chile. So this is technically a startup, though sometimes it feels more like I'm back doing research, except there is a work-life balance and I actually make money, which is nice. Um, so I'm really happy to talk about, you know, how that switch has been going and everything.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourself. For those of you attending today, please post your questions in the chat, or you can use the question box that was linked in the email. I will be monitoring both. So to get us started, I would like to ask, do you find your work in industry to be as intellectually stimulating as your work in astrophysics research was?
I'll jump in here. So I will say yes, I do. And that's one of the reasons I'm really excited to talk to people today, because this was a big thing that, I mean, I still hear people in academia, like my colleagues that are thinking of leaving, talk about is whether it will be rewarding or not. And it's very rewarding. So I'm currently working for a startup company doing research and development. And every day I get to, work on research problems that are specific to this company. But what I will say is that it moves at a different pace, but it's still very rewarding. And I'm also happy to answer follow-up questions related to that if anyone has them. But yes, it is very rewarding, and I hope people, start to accept that a little bit more in academia.
Yeah, I would like to say that I also find it very intellectually stimulating and rewarding. In my first team joining provincial government, there was actually a lot of people who are former PhDs in across all the sciences, as well as being in a public health and epidemiology team. There's already a lot of epidemiologists, so we actually had journal club meetings, and our team co-authored a whole bunch of epidemiology papers. So we are still part of that. We go to conferences sometimes, mostly virtually because of costs and everything. There's not going to be travel or anything like that. Uh, one thing we, one thing that is different, but I'm really, I find really rewarding still, is that our day-to-day work is not to write paper, which is actually the part I like the least about academia. So that works really well for me. Our day-to-day work is to do analysis that will help people make decisions. And then after the fact, when there's a bit of extra time, we go back and rewrite the papers. We often publish things that we did like 3 or 4 years ago. And so that means we're not going to be publishing in Nature or anything like that. Right? It's going to be like research notes type papers where we're just like logging the fact that this analysis was done for this particular thing. Like a lot of time when we submit a paper, the referee comments like, this is not novel, but that's okay. Like we're just doing like what you might think of like the core thing of science is to move science and data along, right? So uh, I find that very rewarding as well, knowing that we're contributing that way as well as the less visible things where we're just helping decision makers behind the scenes in government move on, make things. And I guess the other part of it is I really enjoy supervising students and teaching and outreach as an astronomer. And I don't do astronomy outreach anymore in my role, but I still like supervise teams. I mentor new employees. I talk to people who are interested in going into government work after astronomy. So I still get that. I find stimulation in that as well.
I find that the kind of thinking I have to do now is a little bit different. Like in grad school, for a lot of the day-to-day work, reducing spectra or whatever, there's tools available. You kind of follow the recipe. And then when you're doing the research and you're finding something new, you have a question, you kind of get to the answer by any means necessary, inventing a new algorithm if you have to, like just making it, pushing forward. Now this is going to sound like I work in a box, but that's not what I mean. Now I'm like in this constraint of like this larger program that I'm writing for. So we make a universe simulator. It has to run on a home computer, and I have to solve these very interesting problems. For example, I was working on a climate model for planets to run in the simulator, but it has to run on like a typical gaming computer. So the way I think about solving problems is a little bit different because I have to fit into this sort of pre-existing thing and figure out like where are the compromises, what can I sacrifice in the name of like performance, because again this is like a computer game basically. But I don't find it constraining, I find it interesting. There's just like new rules to follow. So I find it very like intellectually stimulating. I am actually a much more well-rounded astronomer these days with what I'm working on, but I'm also way better at computer programming. So I write everything in C++. I'm sort of leaning over towards the graphics side of things. I'm excited to learn a little bit of like GPU programming. And I find it very rewarding as well because now I'm making something that like millions of people see versus the paper I wrote that like, a few people are going to see. So I very much like the work that I do.
I'm happy to jump in on this too, if you don't mind. I actually find my work now more stimulating than I did as a PhD student. One, because it has direct applications, and I think I'm sort of cheating here because I still do things very similar to what I did as a graduate student, right? Building data reduction pipelines for a new instrument. But The difference with working for a startup and not in academia is that instead of having, 2 years to solve a problem, you have 2 weeks to solve the exact same problem because time really is money in a startup, certainly in industry in general. For me, that's a lot more fun. It can be more pressure in the sense that you got to get something done quickly, but it's more exciting because then you're constantly doing new things.
I also find it to be very intellectually stimulating to be in my current line of work. I used to think that astronomy and astrophysics were like very unique, and I would only find those to be worthwhile of my time and my effort. I definitely put astronomy and astrophysics on a pedestal for a long time. Um, and I still do in some way. I love astronomy. Um, but I think for me, just like being in a scientific endeavor, scientific pursuit in general is very important. So working at Ocean Networks Canada, it's still a scientific organization. I'm still doing science all the time. I even go to conferences. I've been to two underwater acoustics conferences, and they're very awesome conferences. Um, so yeah, it's possible to leave academia and still be doing science. And it's yeah, just as intellectually stimulating, I find.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that none of us are bored out of our minds, or none of you are bored out of your minds doing industry. The next question we have, and I saw there was one in the chat, but Megan already got that. So the next one we have is, do you believe it is possible to work in the industry and still have flexible schedules? For example, starting at 9:30 a.m. or like, I don't know, how easy is it to get a remote position or make your position remote if you started as hybrid, that kind of thing?
I think that depends entirely on where you're working. Depends on the company, depends on the company's culture. I'm in a very fortunate position where we are fully remote and we are all over the world, so it's very flexible. There's a couple days a week where we have like a window where we all have to be online and available, but otherwise we make our own schedules.
Yeah, I just want to like reiterate that. So I think I'm very lucky as well. So I have a hybrid position, but I only have to go into the office once a week because it's Toronto and it's actually quite far from where I live in Ontario. But my team is totally cool with that. And the policy of the company is flexible working hours so that if you need to take a break midday and then pick up work later in the day, that's fine. But you are sort of expected to be available through the normal working window, and to respond within like a reasonable amount of time. Um, but yeah, so it's very flexible and it exists. It just depends on where you end up working and the company culture.
I'll chime in a little bit from someone who's currently in the market and speaking more towards the private data science positions kind of thing. So resonating with some of the points already made, I think it's very company and team dependent even. There are definitely major push for return to office kind of deal. Most position advertised are hybrid per se. Some of them try to push for full return to work. Again, this is more in the open job market of corporate space and private data science kind of deal. Once you get in, you may be a little different in the sense like some teams, especially if you have a manager who, are flexible, as well as there's no hard top-down government, certainly common policy, they may allow you to work full remotely kind of deal. But also related to that, that means the full remote job actually has been very competitive, especially given that most, again, private sector data science jobs are looking in Toronto. I see about 80% of openly advertised position in Toronto, which means if you're not willing to relocate, basically everyone's competing for full remote role kind of deal. So just thought, yeah, paint a little picture on that front, but also qualifying that it is a very specific sector. In that it is, openly advertised private sector data science.
Kind of a follow-up that was in the chat that I see that Megan and Carter have already responded to, but how do you guys see like how is the working culture and industry different from academia? Like we were talking about 9 to 5, but what about expectations for overtime, especially if you're like on a salary versus on an hourly? Are they expect like I know my dad works salary and he's like, that means you don't work 40 hours a week, that means you work 60 hours a week. Does there seem to be like a further push to put in more hours than maybe that 40-hour work week? How do you, like, I know you guys talked a lot about work-life balance, but how do you see that actually, um, how does that come out in the time?
I'm happy to mention for how that works for a startup. Um, for startup, things really happen in big sprints. So for instance, we had first light on our telescope. So as you can imagine, I was doing 60 hours a week for a couple months with that. But I have two kids, so that's not feasible long term. So now I took leave, and now when I came back, I'm doing more like 20 hours a week, just to slowly get back into things now that we're no longer in first light mode. And that's feasible with the startup and certainly with other companies as well, but it's a give and take.
Yeah. I'll chime in with like the unionized government worker perspective because a lot of government work will be unionized. I'm not in the union anymore because I'm in management, so it's more like a salary role. But when I started, and my team are union members, so uh, you essentially, we have it's 35 hours a week of work. That's what it is in BC. I think federal government is maybe 37 and a half hours a week of work. And you have break time, lunch time, uh, the start and end time is in theory the employer can set it. A lot of times you're working on a team of other like researcher type role, data roles. It's going to be very flexible because it doesn't really matter when you do your work. Uh, but usually that means something like, okay, you can pick a start time between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. and then you work your 8 hours or 7 hours or whatever that way. Uh, but sometimes though, often common in government, you're not working on a data team. Like you are the data person on a team of multidisciplinary person, working with a policy analyst, working with a researcher, working with other roles. So you're the data component of that whole team, which means you're going to be interfacing with your team a lot. So you're not, other people will be working more of a regular corporate thing because that's their background, right? They're not going to be working only remotely. They're going to have to interface with people. And a lot of times your role as a data scientist in government is that you're the voice of the data. You're that interface that helps someone will be like, I want to know something about this thing. And then you can go, okay, well, that's your problem in like English. Here is what the data can do it. And here's like how I'm going to translate your English real world business problem into a data problem, solve it, and then convert your thing back and communicate back as a business response. So because of that, like there's going to be a lot of alignment with how other teams work, and you have to line up your time. Uh, yeah, but that said, you mean you're protected from overtime requests. There's actually no money for overtime a lot of times, so like you can't work overtime. But people just put their work down when the day is done, and we just yeah we just do that. So there's a lot of really great work-life balance that way.
So I work at a privately owned software company that's quite small. We're 13 people. I'm salaried and the expectation is about 35 to 40 hours a week. It's pretty flexible, but it's got a management has a very realistic and compassionate view of this. So we sort of, when you're hired on, you have to acknowledge that when there's a big project and we have a deadline, you may be working a lot more. If we have never done this, but if we released software that, I don't know, was crashing people's computers, the expectation would be that this is an emergency. You're going to drop everything, come back, and we're not going to crash any more people's computers. But after one of these like harder times where if we're working towards a deadline and putting in a lot of longer hours, everybody's expected that, you're going to get to take a little break. My company also has a very compassionate approach to like time off, sick leave, mental health leave, and a very generous vacation time. So that's very nice. I recall in one of my earlier years at this company, I didn't use all of my vacation time by the end of the year. And then I realized in December, like, uh-oh, it doesn't roll over. What am I going to do? And then I asked my manager if I could take a couple of Fridays off because it was really short notice, it seemed like. And he was like, yeah, that's your time. You should take it if you want to. And I said, won't our like the big owner, the big boss, won't he be upset? And my manager's response to me was, oh, he loves life way too much to worry about whether or not you're taking like a Friday off before Christmas. So I'm very lucky that I work in a place like that. But if something big comes up, it's expected that you'll be available. Of course, if you have previous plans or an emergency or something, they're, kind about that. So.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, so I'm salaried, also working for a startup, but I do feel like I have a better work-life balance now than I did when I was in academia. Um, I do know that because there's flexible working hours at this company, that when there is a big crunch, there is an expectation that you get your work done. But whatever that is, if you get it done and you get it done in 40 hours, then you're good, essentially. I think I've only seen it happen once where there was something that was supposed to be done and did not get completed, and people had to work a little bit over the weekend to complete that work. Um, so yeah, I think basically what everyone else is saying, when there's a time crunch for, there's deadlines, it can be expected that you work a little more. But management here is also very understanding in the same way that then you'll get to take a little bit more time off in the following week. Like you average it out so that you work like 35 to 40 hours a week and you're not working too much. Also, your time off is very protected. They don't want to hear from you when you take your time off, basically, because as Megan said, it's your time. And I think that's really healthy, and I appreciate that perspective. Yeah, so very good work-life balance.
I found that when I was applying for jobs, the job description itself would usually be pretty explicit about their their job demands and time demands. Like some descriptions would be like, at company, we love working long hours. And coming out of my PhD, I was just like, absolutely not. I'm not applying for that job. So yeah, I'm unionized and I work 35 hours a week and it's pretty consistent and it's so pleasant. So you can be pretty picky. You can get the work-life balance that you want.
So I add a little bit on some of the observations and information got from some of my contacts. So I knew reasonably new hired quote unquote scientists, which is their fancy data scientist term for Uber. And it's funny because he's based in Toronto. Their work's hybrid, but I've encountered where he had to stay behind in the office because he's got teammates in the West Coast time zone kind of situation. So while I understand, I think the work hours still reasonably protected within their team in the sense that you can work about up to 40 hours a week. Sometimes it does have awkward working hours if you have, collaborators, teams that are across different time zones. And I think, since the start of the pandemic, remote work becoming more common, I think these kind of awkward hours are also becoming a little more common in the private sector.
Switching tacks a little bit, we got a question from Alexander Lure asking, some of you mentioned doing postdoc before going into industry. Did you go into the postdoc knowing industry was your goal, or did that happen after? And I'm going to tag on to that saying, do you think having done a postdoc helped you in your application to industry by giving you kind of a more work experience rather than just straight student experience?
I guess I could start. That's actually a very interesting question because I think the job market has shifted quite significantly. And so, especially towards my postdoc, I very intentionally built on making my resume very, industry friendly and very transferable kind of situation. And then kind of find out the hard way that the job market has shifted quite substantially. And so, for those of you who has been in the first session of these career perspectives, Mukti mentioned something about the technical glass ceiling kind of deal. And what I realized is unfortunately a bit too much skills that are on the other side of the glass ceiling in the sense like they're highly transferable, they're not technical. The ones that really differentiate you from a lot of technical roles who has been, work experience both in academia as well as in industries. And then I got stuck in the overqualified, underqualified purgatory kind of situation. So that's kind of where I'm at. I should take some validation in the sense that some of the positions I was interviewing for are reasonably high pay and pretty to actually, I guess advocating for, labor wage and so forth. They're starting about 160K and one of them starting 172K, I think, something like that. One of them senior role position, actually including Uber kind of deal. So there's that validation, but also realize my market appeals very niche. So currently I'm actually still connected with Uber recruiter who's keen on matching me with a team, but there's not too many teams that is interested in what I had to offer. And so going back is I think there are, depending actually what you want to go into, because my perspective is very much in the private sector data science. I mentioned for some roles for the panelists who are here right now, having had postdoc and PhD could be an asset kind of deal. So ultimately, it kind of depends on the kind of job you're looking for, what the job openings are like, and what the hiring is looking for kind of situation. And so that's a good question. I could go deeper into it. In short, is yes and no, and depending on what it is, but also the job market, at least in the private sector, for the openly advertised roles has shifted quite substantially. Maybe to add on that, I'm currently working for a renewable energy company part-time, and I'm actually kind of writing a grant proposal for them with the idea of potentially actually turning the thing into a full-time position. And so one thing I think my postdoc have allowed me to do quite well, including actually leading large collaboration, about 80 people kind of situation, it's that things like being able to talk to executive level people, presenting and distilling complex ideas into fairly actionable insights to layman's position, as well as ability to rank grant proposals, do open up opportunities. And so right now I'm hoping to apply for grants that basically brings innovation in renewable into the private sector in commercialization. And in that sense, potentially, creating a position that I find a lot of fulfillment in, and also actually match a lot of skill that I've, intentionally built up in postdoc to do. So there are these opportunities if, you work towards it and you got lucky enough kind of deal. But I think the general job market, it could potentially be penalizing. That's, I guess, the bottom line.
I can also comment on this question about postdocs. I had a few different postdoc opportunities. A lot of them were in the United States. I wasn't keen to leave Canada, so the postdoc I ended up doing was actually a postdoc of convenience. I did a postdoc at my alma mater with my PhD supervisor. He wanted us to finish a paper that we had submitted prior to my defense, but it hadn't been accepted, and there was a few comments from the reviewer. He also wanted some overlap between me and the next person because there was a particularly complicated project, and I wanted some income while I was looking for a job. So I was very lucky that my PhD supervisor was in a position to pay me for an extra like 8-10 months or so after my defense. I defended. I tried to take 8 weeks off. He asked me to come back early because I got the comments from the journal. I ended up coming back early and not taking my full 8 weeks off that I wanted to take off. So I took off more time between the postdoc and starting my actual position at the job I'm at now. But that's a possibility that you guys, everybody listening should know about. If you're looking for some income and to try and finish up some projects between defending and up, like if you haven't found an industry position that starts, right after or at your deadline, you can inquire with the people in your department, your PhD supervisor, or someone else to see if there might be like a short-term postdoc opportunity to kind of hold you over. So I was fortunate that this was quite flexible. My PhD supervisor basically said, I need you to work until this date guaranteed, but after that, we'll go until you find a position, which was very kind and very mutually beneficial for both of us. I had income, he got a project wrapped up and another project like really well lined up for the next person to just come in and take over. And as far as like, did it help me in my actual career? I would say so, because it was a different mindset. Like in the PhD, it was very much like, I have to write this thesis. There's this thing that I must finish and my whole life depends on it. I have to get it done, which maybe wasn't super healthy and great for my work-life balance. But in the postdoc, I was like, oh, there's no longer the deadline. There's no longer this thing I have to finish. Like, yeah, we're going to finish this paper. It'll get done, but my degree does not depend on it anymore. So it was a good way to switch into like a more independent researcher kind of mindset. I mean, I was doing that near the end of my PhD too, but it just maybe the title of student like weighs heavy on one while in grad school, and then to have that student label removed, it felt very different to me. So I don't think it gave me any extra skills I needed for the job that I did, but it helped with the mindset for sure.
Yeah, I'll jump in here because I did two postdocs. And so what I'll say is that they actually both helped me gain experience that was useful for coming into industry. But when I went into my first postdoc in Leiden, so I was employed for Alma Observatory, so 50% of that postdoc was support scientist work. I definitely had the idea that I might continue on doing radio astronomy. But then for my second postdoc, I actually had my daughter at that point in time. My husband got a Banting Fellowship, and I had an opportunity to go with him to where he would do his Banting Fellowship, and do another postdoc there. And that was the point in time when I started to think, okay, we have a family. What are we going to do like in the future, basically? And there aren't that many astronomy jobs in Canada. So I had a fellowship position in Canada and was able to use that to actually develop more skills that were specific to industry at the time. So if you have that freedom where you are in your career, I would suggest definitely do that. So I jumped in on, I took like Google's generative AI 5-day intensive course, and I ended up doing some machine learning projects because I knew those skills were very useful for industry. And everything that I did ended up being something that I could put on my resume, and in the end ended up being very valuable and helped me get the role that I have now. So while I didn't know that I would end up going into industry, I think the postdocs that I did specifically gave me like skills that were very transferable. And so ultimately, I think it's how you sell that work too, because I want to emphasize that we all have transferable skills, but the language that's used in industry and how you describe those skills is different than what we use in academia. So as long as you can figure out how to translate what you've done into industry language, think that that can be a very like that can be very useful for you. But that was my unique situation there.
Okay, I'm going to kind of bounce off that with a new question. What do you guys think was the single most important transferable skill that you gained in academia, and what was the industry title that you kind of said it was? Like outreach, writing papers, communicating with executives, etc.
It's hard for me to remember. I don't think that there is one most useful skill. So what I would suggest, and I'm sure you've covered this in the other lectures, is that every job listing has words that it's using to describe what it wants you to do for the job. One of the things, like for example, my first postdoc, I got cross-functional skills, so working on different teams because I was working as a part of a big observatory. It's an international observatory. There are many people around the world working on different aspects of, running the observatory. And so that was like one term that I came upon in like the job search process. So cross-functional teamwork is one that I ended up getting from like that position. But that is just the one that I can remember right now. I'm sure there are many more. So I'll let somebody else jump on while I think about this and look at my resume again.
I guess I can quickly hop in here. I mean, I'm kind of like Mike from so like on the market, but one thing I mentioned my blurb or want to make emphasize to everyone is that one skill you have you may not know by name is that you do all the data wrangling, you do all the hard work, but you also have to explain it to people of all levels. So I think like it can be a variety of industry positions, but you're qualified to both be like a data analyst or data scientist, but if you want to go into more like managerial or like team-facing roles, you can do that because having to explain something hard to your supervisor, the public, or a large conference is something that is really transferable to basically anything. So don't forget your time, spent making your slides for whoever talks when you're making your CVs.
Yeah, I would say like for me, like, and also when I hire people into my team, like the most important skill is the ability to like problem solve and get given a challenge or a task with like here's the starting point, here's some vague parameters, and here's what we want in the end, and being able to manage a project, think about all the steps and do it all yourself or lead it or work with a collaborator to do it. That's probably the most important skill. And like the industry term, at least in a lot of like government and HR type thing, is called analytical thinking. Like it's not analytics like data analytics. Analytical thinking is the ability to take a big problem and break it into small parts so that you can solve it. That's like so that's like the kind of phrasing you want to use, and I think that's what you really want to sell as a PhD.
Apologies if someone already said this because I was typing an answer in the chat, but I think my most transferable skill, it's quite broad, but I think it's just the problem solving. In a PhD, you are solving problems that no one has ever solved before. There is no answer in a book. And I solve problems like that every day at work where they say, we want to do X, it hasn't been done before, go figure it out. And I am not afraid to tackle it because of the work that I did in my PhD. And I think that every PhD, whether it's astronomy, history, something else, you have that skill, which is extremely valuable.
Okay, good wrap up on that one. I have a really good question here that somebody put in the question box that I think applies to everyone here. Were you anxious about leaving academia? And looking back, do you have any advice, reassurance for your past self? And were there any misconceptions or fears about industry that turned out to be untrue?
I'd be really happy to give this one a go. I have a hopeful answer for that. So when I first started thinking about leaving academia, when I was actually just starting my PhD, the GSC at the time had another round of these types of talks where there were industry people presenting their work. And I remember one of the questions from the audience was, how does it feel to no longer be an astronomer now that you're in the industry? And one of the panelists responded with, well, I'm always an astronomer. I have my PhD in astronomy, even if I don't work in astronomy anymore. And for me, that has always rung true. I'm glad I was able to find a job still in astronomy, but you're always an astronomer. You can always do work. I still write papers with my PhD advisor. Like you can still do astronomy even if you're doing a different job.
I mentioned in my intro that when I decided to leave academic astronomy, there was a grieving period. It was very scary to have worked for, a bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD. I took an extra year in my undergrad, so like coming up on like 10 plus years of schooling for a very specific career, and then just think, oh, let's do something else. Like it was terrifying. Much like Carter, I'm very lucky that I found a position where I still get to do astronomy. But I think also what he said about you are always an astronomer, I think that's true. And what I loved about astronomy is the learning, and learning never stops as long as you keep putting effort into it. So it's scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's okay to grieve if you're deciding that you're leaving.
Yeah, I had a lot of feelings about leaving academia. I think, when you spend so much time in a particular field that you become very attached to it and it becomes a part of your identity, just even the thought of stepping outside of academia can make you feel like you're kind of giving up on something. And I think that's why also I think part of that is sort of sold to us in academia because when you're academia, you're around academics who stayed in academia most of their lives. And so you don't have that outside perspective of what it will be like, except for, these events which are now becoming more common. But for me, I grieved for sure. I was hesitant and scared and all of those things. And I now look at that and I think, oh, it ended up turning out okay. It's great. But yeah, there were a lot of hard feelings. So I think it's very normal to have those feelings leaving.
Yeah, I just want to validate the hard feelings too. I think for me, when I left, my oldest kid was 2 years old, and I think the moment where it hit me the most was really strange. It was just in my last few weeks of being a professional astronomer, and I had volunteered to go to my son's daycare, and I was reading a space like board book to the group of kids, and I'm like, wait a minute, like when my kid grows up, he's not gonna know me as an astronomer, like he's not gonna know me like. So I'm like, oh, okay, like my kid is gonna have a whole different view of me, and that could be a good thing too. Like, this is to be different, but that's when I'm like, oh yeah, like a big part of my identity for 12 years, for me would change now. So, but 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 like I think staying connected to academia has really helped. Events like this, I think on average uh I end up like spending like a couple of hours every month just talking to people who are thinking about leaving astronomy. And you still can be connected to your local university as like adjunct and like or some kind of mentorship program too. So I think like, those are the way I find to be connected.
When I decided I wanted to leave academia, I spoke to every former astronomer I knew, and Henry was one of the most helpful people I spoke to.
Same here. And I also wanted to mention that yeah, I want to like echo what Carter said. Like I still feel like an astronomer. I'm still treated like an astronomer at work, actually. Like people know me as the astronomer at Oceanographers Canada. Um, but then I also do a lot of astronomy outreach. I still bring my telescope places and show people the planets and deep sky objects, and that really scratches the itch for me.
I know a couple of people that work for Environment Canada now doing climate change stuff, and there are three former astronomers in their office. And my friends in that group have told me that they refer to them like as the astronomers.
So it never really leaves our identity. The next question I have here, also in the question box, is I see that for data science positions, machine learning skills are in very high demand. If our academic research did not involve machine learning, is there a class or methods you recommend to develop that skill so it is useful in an industry context?
Yes, and I'm going to say this because I never took a single class in machine learning and then ended up working on diffusion models during my PhD. Um, Taking a class is the worst way to learn machine learning. Getting your hands dirty with some real data and just doing a project, not super difficult one, but like one that's going to challenge you, is the best way to learn about machine learning and new algorithms.
I took a class, and even in the class, the instructor said what Carter just said, which is like, this is just the beginning. You need to go get some data. And there are websites that are filled with data sets that you can just grab and play with. Or you probably have a lot of data from your PhD, or you know where to find archival data.
Yeah, just go to huggingface.com, and so that's what it's called. And they have a bajillion projects you can work on to get your hands dirty.
So the advice I was given by somebody who was in data science when I realized I wanted to leave academia was to take a few courses online. And his advice was very general. He was like, you don't need to do an expensive boot camp. You don't need to do a specific course. Go to any of the like numerous online places. Like, I don't know if lynda.ca is a thing anymore, but I think it's LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, Coursera, all of these places. They have courses on everything you can think of, and they go on sale all the time. Don't pay full price. And your library might have access, your alumni through your university might have access, and they're usually like 10, 20 hours long, and you can start there and then get into some data once you've got the basics. And that's what I did. It helped a lot. It's the advice I was given. And it's the advice I continue to give to everybody else.
I think it's good advice. Just to quickly echo that, add on to that is that like the skills and like libraries and things you do for the products are important, but for industry, sometimes they want people who know like Azure for like a Microsoft or like other like proprietary things. So you can maybe learn those either yeah, if like you're interested in like specific data roles, that just takes a little research. But the general stuff, yeah, is like on your GitHub put project, you'd be like, hey, I'm really into hockey. Here's a model I made predicting stuff based on player stats, and that it kind of will get your foot in the door of being machine learning knowledgeable. I guess just one quick other thing. Sometimes roles that are machine learning, they want someone who's like built the models or done something really more like on the computer science end. If you haven't done that in your PhD, that's fine. But if you really want to go into that, you maybe have to do more academic or classwork. But yeah, most of the case, they just want someone who can run the model and get something that actually is actionable and explainable. And you could be that person.
Max, could I get you to tell them about your that test you had to do? That you had to actually write the thing?
Oh, like a coding test I had to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, some roles. I applied for a role with a major AI company that has something to do with the Anthropocene. I didn't get but one they are all just maybe a warning to the wise is that even though in the age of AI coding or using AI steps, you still might have to be asked to be kind of a code monkey. So if you really want to go more that route, um, leak code is your friend, but don't want to scare people away from applying for jobs. You don't have to take coding tests to get to the door of many of these places, but if that's something you're interested in, it's not bad to brush up on those skills when you're leaving academia for the market.
As someone who works for a software company who's been a part of the interview process, we've never made somebody do a code test. If
Yeah,
you,
they're not common anymore.
yeah, if you can talk about it intelligently, like we can tell.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit of different perspective as well in terms of even for data science, quote unquote, because it's a very broad term in the private sector, machine learning is not necessarily the skills that they're looking for. And so some of the panelists have already pointed out there are different focus. So there are definitely machine learning focused role, and that'd be pretty clear on job description. There's even positions that are even heavier on machine learning. They're often known as machine learning engineers. So if that's something you're interested in and you're still early enough in your grad school, I think doing that as part of your project or volunteer or get an internship would be probably the easiest way to learn those. And in terms of marketing, in that these days, honestly, it's really easy to literally use AI and whip up some sort of machine learning project. Everyone can do it in literally a few seconds. And so I think the hiring is also shifting quite a lot in terms of what they look for in terms of demonstrating what you have. And the first level is on the resume. In that case, you want to actually being able to show that you've worked on project real life data and particularly impact that's related to job kind of deal. So if it's say an actual business, you want to show business like kind of impact. And so, basically, from my own experience, what I think made a good breakthrough in my resume is showcase that I've done business like impact through the climate NGO, in this case, optimizing campaign strategy and things like that, using open source data. And honestly, in that project, I don't think machine learning matters for most of the position that either I'm applying to or got interviewed for. And so do think carefully about like what kind of role you want, what you enjoy, and I think one very good advice I've got is also don't end up doing quote unquote tool chasing. And the job market right now is actually very straight data in the sense like everything's kind of high fit. So having too much on your resume may actually signal that you don't have a good focus or specialty. And so unless you know you really enjoy machine learning and that's what you want to do, go for it, pick it up, and there's a lot of good resources. But at the same time, do keep in mind, for example, if the role looks up for a more analytical role or causal inference slash experimentation, having machine learning on your resume may actually be a penalizing factor if you already have enough qualifying things that match the job description already. So yeah, just thought I'd provide that perspective because I would say going back to the actual early question of what's one misconception about industries is that I think even when I was in grad school, people thought data science is all about machine learning. And turns out that's not true. And actually by volume of positions out there, most data science jobs doesn't really use machine learning per se. And so yeah, just something I'm gonna bring up when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think this came up in the very first session of this series, which is tailor your resume. It's good to be well-rounded. It's good to have lots of skills, but like Mike was saying, don't just slap everything onto your resume as a one size fits all. You can't do that. You have to tailor it.
Okay, now the question nobody wants to, the elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about. Rajiv asked, pretty much everyone said that they left academia for the stability, but with the current job market and AI layoffs and stuff, is the stability still there?
I'm gonna jump in here because this is I'm working for a startup and well I'll say No, the stability is not there, but it's not necessarily because of AI layoffs. It depends on where you're working. So, startups are obviously notoriously unstable in the sense that they need to be successful in order for your job to continue. And the other aspect of my work is it's research and development. So there's potentially an expiration date for what I can provide for the company. And I think anybody working for, startups has to think about that depending on what they're doing. But there are layoffs at larger companies too. The stability for my family came with just being able to be in the location that we want to be in. And it is technically a permanent contract. So it's not like a 1 year or 2 year contract. So it is more stable in that sense. There are great benefits. The pay is very good. And so there's stability in the sense that we can save more money this way. And so even though there's uncertainty on the job market, no matter whether you're in industry or doing a short-term contract in academia, there's stability in another sense that you generally get better compensation, I think, in industry for these roles.
I completely agree. No job is guaranteed permanent. Something can always happen. But there's this sort of, I guess, short-term stability that Ashley's talking about that I completely agree with. Just being paid what you're worth can make a huge difference. And like, I hope I work at this company a long time. I love my job. I love my pay. I love everything about it. But if it goes sideways in a couple of years, I will find another like industry position that's hopefully got similar pay, similar values, and not have to worry about like scraping by in the meantime, like I would as a postdoc. But for a more realistic, like a more direct answer, I mean, about the stability, I am technically in the video games industry. Every day there's a headline. Ubisoft lays off 3,000 people. EA lays off whatever. The only company where they're like actually growing is Nintendo. They're always growing, but in industry games, things seem to be a little bit more stable. Like these big, huge like gaming companies that I've named, they're a mess. I don't know what's going on. Well, I do know what's going on. There's a report every year that's put out by the games industry to explain what the heck is happening. You can look it up. It's PDF. It's like this fat. But our company is quite stable and they are transparent about that stability. So I don't have exact numbers, but they're open about the fact that there is enough money in the bank today if we stopped having income to pay everybody's salaries for a year. But that's not the case where we have income. We're selling copies, we're making money, which is very reassuring to know. Um, I guess that's similar to working in academia where your contract is like X long, like every day that somebody doesn't tell me, uh-oh, there's a problem, I know I've got another year at this company, which is a weird way to think about it, but it's like, oh, well, that's good. At least I'll have some warning. And I know that at my company, if everything went sideways, everybody would work together to figure out what is next, whether that's working on our resumes together or finding a way to save the company or something. But we're small, right? Like we're like 13 people. I can't say the same about a large company. But yeah, video games industry is a mess. The question also specifically asked about AI layoffs. I think it's rough right now, but I have a feeling in about a year. So hopefully when a lot of the people attending this panel are starting to apply, or maybe after that, I think the outlook, like my hunch, my gut feeling is that the outlook will be a bit better. It's tough right now, but I think companies are coming around and realizing that AI is not a replacement for actual people. So hard right now, but hang on, it will get better, I
I'll
think.
I'll, I'll
No
back that
promises.
up. Yeah, the last round of US job numbers showed exactly that there's been a rehiring of a lot of people that were initially laid off due to AI. So it was looking pretty horrible there for the last year. Totally agree. But it's not as scary anymore, I'd say. It's getting there.
Yeah, I would say like in government right now, you hear in federal and provincial that they're trying to downsize, reduce the public sector workforce. Uh, like, since I left the union, my job is a lot less stable because in the union there's like seniority, there's a whole process to being laid off. Like after I get out this call, HR could call me and say, "Oh, hand over your keys, Henry, you're done." Right? Like it could happen. But you know, it, labor laws do change in different places, but in BC, I know that if I'm laid off without cause like that, which means that it's not my fault that I'm laid off, then there's severance, right? There's no they still pay you for some amount of time. So the way I think about it is not about as much stability, but like an unstable equilibrium, right? Like L2 Lagrange point, where like if you are is it L2? Yeah, I don't know. But so like if you are like you need to you have built up enough skill, enough like with the compensation, you have enough savings, and if you and you have the severance that you have all these like ability to be in where you want to be. You have the family stability or like whatever life stability you have, so that you can react and respond to anything that changes. Like if I lose my job tomorrow, I know I can probably sustain my family for another year. I have that time to like find something else to do, and and yeah. So you don't have to have like a contract to say that you're stable. You just need to know that you're able to upkeep your life the way you need to be stable.
Yeah, so I was like, did you have more to say?
It was
Okay.
very short. I was just going to say there wasn't a lot of, I guess, safety net when I was in grad school financially, versus there is now an industry where I'm being paid what I'm worth.
I was going to add, particularly given that this panel is towards grad students thinking on transition, I would say even before the recent challenges in shipping job market, the first initial transition is always hard. And once you basically got quote unquote the superficial stamp of approval that you have experience in private sectors in say like data science, getting a job again is easier and resonating with a lot of panels as mentioned that usually your salary is substantially larger than what you'd be getting in academia per se. So it does build you quite a bit of financial buffer kind of deal. With that being said, I think it's important to also acknowledge that the job market is a lot tougher than what it used to be. And that includes, I've spoken indirectly with a former Astro person who's now a fairly senior data scientist at like one of the probably the biggest tech companies. And he did mention from both what we've seen as well as the amount of Astro people reach out to him, currently it is the toughest job market you can get into, at least the private sector data science. So there's that perspective to put in mind. When it comes to, I think the long-term stability, and I think it's also important to acknowledge that, there has been decades of escalation in exploitation of laborers. And so a lot of AI, things right now is just really amplifying pre-existing issues kind of deal. So things will be tougher, but again, resonating that compared to academia, I think many dimensions of stability is still a lot better on those fronts. When it comes to some of the short-term AI trends, it's also worth acknowledging that recently big companies, actually a lot of companies have blew through their AI usage budget because they basically pay per token kind of thing in less than 4 months for the entire annual budget. And so what a lot of trends right now are companies having a lot of FOMOs and not really know what to do with AI kind of deal. So to kind of ease some concern, it's that a lot of what we do, especially the transferable skills, which I highlight from where you came from grad school, they're highly transferable. They're still very useful, especially the one I would argue that distinguish from people who've done grad school versus people who haven't are the transferable skills that are hard to replace by AI. So knowing your values and what those transferable skills are and know how to market them, I think will position you pretty well and being a lot more robust against the perceived threat of AI, so to speak. But in the meantime, yeah, there's a lot of, trying to find out a lot of disruptions and a lot of people honestly don't know what AI is capable of and trying to figure out what's going on. So it is a very tough and unstable and uncertain time right now. And just want to acknowledge that it makes sense to be, uneasy about it, to have anxiety about it, and, also just not wanting to sugarcoat it. But there's also positivity knowing that a lot of what you do and a lot of things you're learning as well as have learned do have a lot of values and are quite quote unquote indispensable compared to what AI could do.
All right, new question. Um, what are your opinions on the feasibility of finding a job in industry after finishing a master's degree compared to after a PhD? And I'll add on to that since a lot of you have done postdocs or after a postdoc. So kind of the three levels that we're looking at here.
Maybe I'll start as well. I think it depends on kind of the job you're aiming for. By volume, I would say the more education you have, the more overqualified you are. So in that sense, it does actually make it more and more difficult the further you go on academia. And honestly, me personally, I do have a lot of regrets for staying in academia for that long, particularly knowing that, well, I'm particularly seeing the job market has shifted a lot quicker and very differently from when a lot of my cohorts were making initial transition kind of deal. With that being said, I think it depends on what you find fulfillment and interesting. Because, for example, one of the interviews that made it to the final rounds, I think I was quite impressed. The feedback I got from the hiring manager, who's also the director of data consulting for the company, mentioned that their only concern is that I may get too bored. And I think that's also a common theme. For example, that I have a friend who was a former Meta product manager, and he's mentioned that there are PhDs he's seeing who was in a job that wasn't a good fit for them. And there's just miserable kind of deal. And so it's a good question in the sense that there's also you need a balance between what you actually want versus just sheer volume jobs kind of situation. So my naive impression is that the further you go, the less opportunity there will be. But that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be harder. And so kind of really depends on, what job sector, what kind of specialty you want, and also how you market yourself kind of deal.
I think there's job opportunities at every level. For my particular cohort, like the people who are, exactly aligned with me in terms of where they were in education, the master's degree people are at an advantage just because they got into industry sooner. They've got more experience, they've built up a higher salary sooner, they've had more time to learn how it's different and how to market themselves versus friends I have right now who, again, same cohort as me, we defend at the same time, but maybe they're finishing a postdoc and they're like, oh God, how do I do this? But our other friends that left, 5+ years ago, they're just ahead in that way. But I think you have marketable skills at all levels. I know people at all levels that have had very successful transitions into industry. I think if you are really set on not pursuing an academic career, unless you're really passionate about your specific project in your PhD, I don't know if you might be better off to leave sooner rather than later. I don't want to discourage anybody from getting education for the sake of education. We all have PhDs on this panel here, like we did the whole thing. But if you're really certain you're not going to stay in academia, may as well go into industry now. But again, that's up to you, right? Like at some point you decide to do the PhD for you, not for someone else. And that's important too.
Yeah, I would just add a little bit to that. I think Megan made a good point in the sense, like purely on the financial standpoint of view, leaving the earlier the better kind of situation, especially given how quickly the cost of living has been escalating kind of deal, and also how poorly academia pays. So just on those two fronts, purely financially, I will advise, getting out as early as possible. With that being said, well, I obviously have a lot of regrets in terms of financial stability and so forth. I do still really glad I've done both, PhD and postdoc. There are a lot of things I've learned that are very valuable, and I got to, lead projects and have a lot of autonomies from there. And so, yeah, ultimately it is down to you to decide, what's the cost benefit in those fronts, and while knowing what the job market is like and what the financial situation is like. And it was also acknowledged that unfortunately, I think being able to do, stay in academia or at least do a PhD is becoming more and more a privileged person, at least socioeconomically speaking, thing. And I think a lot of us, who get in academia earlier are lucky and privileged in that sense that there were a time when cost of living is lower, job market isn't, nearly as crazy, for example. And so yeah, ultimately it is up to you to decide what's like. And there certainly are more highly valuable skills at different stages. But I think when it comes to just purely financial, standpoint of view, I personally would advise getting out sooner or later.
I didn't want to come across pessimistic there. I love my PhD project. I'm very glad I did it. And actually, I was headhunted specifically because of the skill set I developed in my PhD and the stuff I did my research on. I would not have my position at Cosmographic Software if I had not done my thesis on the very particular thing I did my thesis on. So.
Okay, I guess I will add my thoughts because I have some conflicting thoughts. So I used to think the earlier you left, the better, because more experience you get in industry, the better. But everyone on the science team in my company has a PhD in different areas, except for people who are like specialized in NMR. Um, and I think that the reason that's the case is because of our problem-solving skills and our ability to do research, because we're doing so much like cutting edge work, they really wanted people who could actually independently do research. So it is valuable, even in industry, to have a PhD in a science field. It, if you end up doing something like a research and development um, job, like I'm doing. Um, and so I still feel really great about doing my PhD. Like I actually talked about my PhD work and the lessons I learned in my interviews because I was really proud of the work that I did and the problems I solved, and that was like relevant to the roles that I was applying to. So even if you end up doing a PhD, I don't think it'll be a waste if you go into industry because it could be very valuable. But it's a challenging, if you're deciding whether to do a PhD or not, it's a very challenging decision. And I would suggest do a PhD because you love what you're doing in the research with the intention of staying in academia, but don't do a PhD because you think it will be useful in industry because it probably won't be ultimately. So that's my perspective.
I think I was given that advice when I was an undergrad too, and it was the advice that I've heard throughout all of academia, which is don't do a PhD unless you're really passionate about it. Do it for you. Do it. Yeah.
And then just kind of add that there definitely are things that you learn in PhD that's very hard to get somewhere else, and those are definitely deeply and highly valuable. But going back to one of the earlier question about, some of the myths about, industry is that there are certain skills that aren't necessarily something that you learn in PhD, but also are highly valuable that you can also learn somewhere else in the career per se. And so one maybe career path that I don't think has been really talked about, I know a few people who went into management consulting. And management consulting is literally something that technically you can even start not long after undergrads kind of deal. And depending on the company, and of course your ethics and value alignment, you could easily basically keep up 3 times as much work experience from management consulting. A lot of people use that as jump board to executive role and position kind of deal. So there are other career paths where you do learn some other very highly valuable things that may not necessarily overlap with academia, but you could also build a lot of those skills quickly if those end up being the things that you're more interested in or more interested in developing. And so I would say it's not, one's better than the other. A lot of it's ultimately down to what you're interested in and what you think you'd like to develop kind of deal. I just want to provide basically both perspective in the sense like I think, most of the panelists here are indeed very happy that we've done, PhD, we've done postdoc kind of thing. And I'd definitely say reiterate that as much as some regrets, I do really value my time in PhD and postdoc. But with that said, there are different kind of skills that you can learn at different places, and so just want to put that perspective out there.
Yeah, the question earlier about what is your most valuable skill, and I said the problem solving. I didn't get that in my master's degree. I was still just doing whatever my supervisor said because I was a baby scientist who didn't know what I was doing. That's a skill I got in my PhD for sure.
Do you guys think there was any like more jobs that came available with it, like that required a PhD, or if like the requiring of a PhD is not really a thing?
I would never have my job if I didn't have a PhD in observational astronomy. Like, and like Megan said, she wouldn't have her job if she didn't have her PhD in her very specific subfield. So it really depends if you want to kind of pigeonhole yourself in that or not.
I don't think my team would have hired me if I didn't have my PhD and that experience.
Having the title of PhD gave me a lot of confidence when I was applying for lots of different jobs. I saw a lot of things that was just, any type of physics, astronomy, or even a bit of chemistry. And I just went, I can do that. And I applied. So it gave me a lot of confidence.
So on that front, I would say it depends. I think for the job I really want, PhD is definitely an asset, especially the transferable skills that I've learned, and including, like I said, right now I'm trying to turn my part-time job into a full-time job. Like not just a PhD, but postdoc experience that I have, I would say is fairly foundational to give me, basically a leg up on that front. With that being said, I think there are also, industry jobs, at least in private sector data science, where PhD is indeed an asset, but they're fairly rare. So going back to Uber, for example, Uber actually have three different classification data scientists. By title, they're data scientists, there are applied scientists, and there are scientists. Even so, I would argue the scientist title roles are closer to kind of research that we do, not quite the same, but a little closer to that. And then in some of the operational heavy, especially the one that involves very complex problem, rather than just like optimizing, say, clicks on their app, for example, which arguably, a more common data science role kind of situation, they do value PhDs preferred. And so for some of the rare roles, like I said, the ones that I personally would find more interesting and stimulating, the PhD is definitely an asset. But when it comes to simply just getting your first job, get your foot in the industry and getting financial security, I find it to be quite kind of penalizing in the sense that, like I said, my Uber recruiter is happy to, match me with a team, but very few teams actually are interested in me. And partially, I think going back, it's that think about what's the risk for hiring as a one way to put yourself in the shoes of the hiring team. And PhD is one of those, it's high risk, high reward in that you could get someone who have a lot of value to deliver, but whether they can deliver it and whether that's what your team's needing is a different story. And unfortunately, PhD is definitely an overkill for a lot of data science role, at least in the private sector. But the good thing is a lot of job description, I think, would be clear in that, I think to be fair, the only jobs where I managed to get interview for, they do say prefer for PhD, and basically all the jobs that didn't say that, I never, heard back kind of deal. So do know that, it opens some doors and you also, close some doors.
Spencer, I want to know about oceanography. How'd it go?
Yeah, well, I didn't get my job because of my PhD, but I know that it helped me stand out because there were a lot of applications for the job, and I was told later that my PhD did help. Um, but a lot of my coworkers have masters, so PhD isn't necessary.
On my team, I'm the only person with a PhD. We have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, bachelor's degrees in psychology, which is not, astronomy. And people who are just very enthusiastic about astronomy and learned everything as they go. We have somebody who's currently doing a math PhD on the team, so I will be the solo PhD, not for much longer.
Maybe one thing to add is that one thing that has shifted in the job market, even for PhDs, is that astrophysics used to be one of the earlier people to go into data science. And for that reason, we were quite respected. And for that reason, physics in general. I think that has shifted partially just because the job market has been saturated with a lot of PhDs. And now there are specific degrees on machine learning and data science as well. So there literally are machine learning PhDs. For a lot of jobs, for example, going back to Uber, since this is what I have a little more experience with, it's they specifically prefer some type of PhD. So operation research is a big one for operations heavy company like Uber. Economics is another big one. A lot of times just simply because a lot of it ultimately need to be business related. And people in economics do actually have, more relevant research background in that sense. So going back to the notion of risk, a lot of transferable skills across PhDs are technically all the same. But when it comes to like, okay, what kind of domain knowledge you may have, certain PhD do have edge over, astrophysics these days. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind in that in the core, the transferable skills is honestly the same, but there is an edge for having something that is a little more domain specific.
Okay, we have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one last question. To kind of finish us off, I'd like to know what is one thing you wish you'd known when you decided to switch to industry?
that I didn't need to that I didn't need to be so scared. That's all gonna work out, and change is good. I spent a lot of time stressed out, anxious, sick to my stomach. Am I making the right choice? But it's all good.
Yeah, I think I want to say the same thing. And also, like, a lot of the things that I valued in academia that I thought I couldn't find elsewhere, like advocacy, working on like diversity initiatives and stuff, like it's actually it is common in other places too. Like I'm on a lot of like diversity committees and like employee resource groups and communities of practice for like BIPOC people, for example, in the BC government. So there's lots of things you can do, and a lot of our work in health was about like the different experiences of the health system you have based on your identity. So I think there was a lot more of that than I thought there would be, and I was really glad to find that kind of fulfilling in my work as well.
I also want to highlight again what Carter said about the fact that you're always an astronomer. Just knowing that would have been helpful. I I'm very lucky in the job that I'm in that I convinced leadership that CASCA is a good place for us to be at the AGM. So after 3 years out of professional astronomy, I attended a CASCA and I showed up and everybody was just so excited to see me and I was so excited to be there and to meet new students. And like once an astronomer, always an astronomer. So don't forget that. You will always be welcome back to this community as far as I can tell.
To piggyback on that, if doing astronomy research is your jam, but you want to go into industry, you can still do astronomy research in your maybe more copious free time in industry as compared to an academic. So that's always possible.
The aerospace sector in Canada is also growing rapidly. If you're going to launch a satellite in Canada, you're probably going to do it in Nova Scotia, and that is growing like crazy. The Halifax like aerospace scene is getting big.
I guess one thing I'll mention is I didn't know I would get to work with spectra outside of astrophysics. So that is actually what I'm working with. It's not spectra from other galaxies or molecular clouds anymore, but it's spectra of like the human body. So yeah, if you work with spectra in astronomy, you could potentially you could go into the field of NMR.
So this is
That's
probably something. Oh, go ahead.
I just said that's really cool.
Yeah, there's definitely people who work on spectra after grad school. Going back at, so I think probably a little more on towards finding the initial job and making the transition. One thing we should knew is resonating what's spoken about in the first session, that roughly 80% of jobs aren't openly advertised, and some of the difficulty is trying to crack that openly advertised game. And these days they are definitely harder. I think another thing I've talked about is there's also a lot of AI slap application these days. It's really easy to whip up applications. And so you need to really stand out about that large volume of noise, and that is difficult. So going back at, so one thing we should have done differently is one, kind of talking to my network a little more and let them know, even a year ahead of my graduation, for example, well, leaving academia per se, knowing that I'd be interested. And mostly because a lot of jobs that aren't openly advertised are probably with smaller companies. And one, they don't have the same resources to do the same hiring and filtering through that large volume of applications. And two, working is a very human endeavor, and knowing a team that you can trust, you can work well with goes a long way. Like you could have the most brilliant, talented person, but if not a good team player, then it's for nothing kind of deal. And so one thing in retrospect that probably would work a lot easier is if I have spoken with my connections more, and even if their teams or workplace doesn't have position right now, they'll have you in mind, and maybe when that opens, they can reach out to you. And anecdotally, actually, that's how I ended up with the renewable company I'm with right now. The co-founder CEO is actually a friend of mine from undergrad. He's from engineering. And eventually, yeah, we start connecting, and it looks like they're really looking to grow more in the data science arm and bring innovations into the renewables, especially with the current political climate. And so, yeah, it's one of those things like, oh, who knows? Like, I had been able to secure some prestigious company for interviews, but ultimately I may just end up fast tracking to the career I want simply because I know someone kind of deal. And so, yeah, I would say, knowing that networking is important, but it's also deeply human and long-term relational, and also putting the words out there even a year before you start actually applying and looking for a job, I think goes a long way.
Spencer and Max, do you have any last thoughts to share with us?
Yeah, I guess I was definitely scared of like the job, like the inflexibility in my schedule going into industry. I really valued that in my PhD, getting to work, whenever I wanted to or needed to. Um, and I was also really afraid of just like sitting in a cubicle and just being like a cog in a machine. But both of those things turned out to not be the case for me. I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule, and I have a really good like work from home policy at my job too. So, and I do have like a cubicle type of thing at work, but it's pretty open, and I really like my coworkers, so it's pretty chill.
Yeah, I was hoping to find something more inspirational to say, but Evan kept saying kind of what I wanted to say. So I'll just say something briefly. Like, yeah, like the theme here is like, no, don't be afraid to second guess yourself. Like you're gonna make yourself happy on the other end and find something really fulfilling, no matter what you do. I know for myself and the panelists here and all my friends who've made the transition that it's gonna end up in a place where you'll be pretty pleased with yourself and down the line.
Okay, and with that, we will finish our last session of our guide for astronomers applying to positions in industry. Thank you, all of you, Ashley, Spencer, Carter, Mike, Henry, and and Max and Megan, for coming and giving us all of your thoughts and advice. We really, really appreciate it. And yeah, just thank you so much and hope to see you all in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck,
Yeah,
everybody.
thanks,
Thank
Bria.
you.
Bye.